Kernels of truth hide the most profound lies.
The fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy.
Empathy is actually a quite bad thing for society because when you identify with the other person as opposed to feeling sympathy for the other person, what you end up doing is making that person's interest predominant.
If you really want to make the world better, spend less time trying to maximize your own altruistic joy, and in a more cold-blooded way, think, how could I help other people?
Elon Musk did the world a solid by shining a light on the hate hard-on the richest men in the world have for empathy. Their salt pours from every venue they inhabit or bankroll, religious, academic, business, you name it. They revile empathy as a scourge, clouding reason, contrary to biblical teaching, or as an exploit of Western civilization. Yet even though their arguments are garbage, rife with factual falsehoods and logical fallacies, they are absolutely correct about empathy. Just not the way they mean. But how did one word get into so much trouble? How did an English word that started life as a translation of a German psychology term get to be such a problem? How did a scientific term referring to the act of projecting ourselves onto someone or something later broadened to refer to wide categories of emotional inference known to be integral to moral sentiment and social function deep into antiquity, now understood to be supported by neurological structures in our brain, become this overwhelming threat in the eyes of business and religious establishment? And how did authoritative historical and religious pillars like Ben Shapiro and evangelical leadership miss that the 120-year-old empathy swapped meaning with sympathy in 1993? Something a straightforward comparison of sympathy and empathy reveals. How did such an established expert on history and Judeo-Christian values like Ben Shapiro stumble on empathy as some alien, biblically ahistorical progressive creation when expressions of its current popular use is sprinkled throughout the Bible and the main topic of Adam Smith's theory of moral sentiments? Fuck if I know. It's a mystery.
The word empathy is a little over 100 years old, originally a word used within music. It only translated into what we know of it today after World War II. I hear a lot of talk in the church preaching about empathy, but it's only once in the Bible used in the NIV translation that's highly debatable. Conversely, there's virtues like compassion and sympathy. Would you agree the word isn't something grounded in historical orthodox Judeo-Christian values? Well, yes. I mean, the idea of empathy as opposed to sympathy is a widely disputed problem. And there are a lot of philosophers who suggest that empathy is actually a quite bad thing for society because when you identify with the other person as opposed to feeling sympathy for the other person, what you end up doing is making that person's interest predominant. And that's a problem when you're creating social policy and when you're creating, for example, moral rules. So feeling sympathy for someone, which is the quality of mercy, is not necessarily the same as feeling empathy for them, which is the idea of I am now in your place. And because I am therefore in your place, all the rules should be changed with regard to me.
It sure as hell paints a picture that stirs up loathing of other people as if they embrace some novel alien concept that asks you to surrender yourself to them. Elon Musk's own remarks about empathy are drawn straight from the effective altruist movement. The utilitarian philosophy is wildly popular among Silicon Valley billionaires, and since business and religious establishments are closely coupled politically, it's not hard to imagine that the sentiments of billionaires diffused into evangelical thinking. Proponents of effective altruism characterize empathy as emotional contagion in their rhetoric to position the philosophy as reason over emotion. Utilitarianism is a natural fit to the culture of business. reinforced by the orthodox economic model of humans as a rational, utility-maximizing species with clairvoyant foresight of the long term. The model valorizes what could be considered psychopathy. What I found noteworthy about advocates of effective altruism like Paul Bloom is that he obviously understands what empathy is, because a psychologist would, and specifies the kind of empathy he's referring to as an academic would, defining his discussion at the outset to emotional surrender. But he goes on to blame it for any number of faults that have little or nothing to do with it directly. He offers up only false equivalents and red herrings to advance his argument.
I'm using empathy in the sense of putting yourself in the shoes of another person, feeling their pain. And it might seem obvious that'll make you a good person because it makes you more likely to care for them and more likely to help them. But one problem is that empathy blinds you to long-term consequences of your action. It's because of empathy that the whole world cares so much more about a baby stuck in a well than we do about global warming.
Exxon does not obsess about babies in wells. It is their cold-blooded, profit-maximizing interest that drives the fossil fuel industry to use their immense political and economic power to thwart and defeat widespread popular demands to confront climate change. It's their own special idea of effective altruism.
A lot of our failures to make the world a better place, but also a lot of our awful actions, are motivated by a sort of moralistic rush. Empathic engagement, being caught up in the suffering of victims, is usually the #1 argument in a democratic country for going to war. If we ever go to war against ISIS, like a full-blown military war, it will be motivated by our feelings for the suffering of their victims. But that's just one consideration. The other consideration is how many people die in wars? How many other victims will they create? But our empathy, our selfish moralizing, zooms us in and says, oh my God, there are these people suffering, let's bomb the crap out of them. Let's destroy the whole country to save these people.
Politicians may manufacture consent for military action on moral or humanitarian grounds, but geopolitical calculation never has been about morals. Foreign policy is a cold utilitarian calculation to advance or defend national power and prestige made by the nation's power elite. It's absolutely absurd to speak of foreign relations governed by empathy. Bruh! Utilitarianism is a principle of doing the greatest good for the greatest number. It is a prosocial goal, but we just have to take it on faith that billionaires like Elon Musk or evangelical pastors know what is best for us. The definition of what's good or best is a matter of moral judgment. Moral sentiments are inseparable from the capacity to infer or reflect the circumstances of others. Morality and empathy are known to be inseparable, not only by science today, but far back into history. Thus, utilitarianism and empathy are also inseparable. They stand as complements to each other. Both are pillars of reason. You cannot throw out one and not corrupt or weaken the other. Empathy is necessary as a bullshit detector. The ability to correctly infer the state of somebody else is also the capacity to detect when something is off. If one suspends empathy, not only does one surrender one's critical faculties and capacity for moral judgment, but one becomes open to be suckered. To be captured by another person's emotion is also to become a tool. The impulse to render assistance is observed everywhere in the animal kingdom and provides a clue that the impulse is so intensely valuable that it readily spills across species. Nature is not stingy with this trait. Broadly, the capacity of any animal to infer the intent of other animals around it is exquisitely useful. For social species, this capacity is elevated with emotional inference and alignment. In humans, this is empathy in all of its variety. Empathy as emotional contagion, for good or evil, is an essential ingredient of collective action. The lie of Elon Musk was to suggest that the empathy exploit is a weakness particular to Western civilization, when it is instead universal to the human condition. He conjured a threat from thin air.
Weakness
What
of
he
Western
did was not so
civilization
much
is
warn
empathy.
of an exploit,
The empathy
but
exploit.
leverage that very
they're
thing,
exploiting.
as so many others are.